Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Echo Worm Live. This is a live stream that we typically do every other week. Last week I had to postpone to this week because I came down with COVID, but this week I'm doing significantly better and I am here and excited. It's one of my favorite things that we do on this channel, where basically everything that you guys ask me in the comments or over on Patreon or over on Discord, we'll talk about those things in the next 2 hours here. It may not take us that long. We may even go longer than that, but that's typically what we shoot for. We try to do this at about 4 o'clock Eastern time every other Thursday. That just kind of seems to be the best time for most people because across in Great Britain and in Europe, gives the opportunity for people to watch this before they go to bed, whereas in the United States, it's typically the end of the school day or people are coming off of work, that sort of thing. So if you have any questions that you didn't get answered prior to the start of this live stream, you're more than welcome to use the live chat. We'll go through the live chat. I see Flick Street Productions is there, Poseidon's Cabin, BFF of Percy, Mirage GSM. Hello to all of you. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Flick Street Productions says, so glad you're better, man. Sorry you got sick. It's the nature of things that seems to be going around. You can still kind of hear it in my voice, but there were a few days where over on Patreon, and you guys will see it in a couple months when it comes up on the channel, but my voice was definitely not where it needed to be. But I just kind of trudged through it, so. Joseph Morrill says, and on today of Echo Worm Live, we see another poor Starbucks drink drank like no one else's business. You alone keep the company going, Mr. Worm. I do tend to enjoy my Starbucks. Yeah, regardless of what you think of the company or anything else going on, I have a pretty consistent like for this very specific drink. So I do have a habit of drinking those every time we're on a live stream. Let's start with a series of questions asked by a lot of people, and I have some good news because these questions are going to be answered very firmly and very specifically. The first one is from Rake, who says, can you make Trials of Apollo? PJO Lover says, please do Trials of Apollo. Ruby Lucas Esterhaas says, please do Trials of Apollo. Potato Alien King and Queen says, could you please do the Trials of Apollo? I'm literally begging you. Splinky Chicken says, are you going to be able to do the Trials of Apollo? Eric says, can you please read the Trials of Apollo? Seaweed Brain says, when is Trials of Apollo out for free? And one Alyssa says, what date in December are you posting Trials of Apollo? I got some good news. You probably noticed on the other channel that today the final of the Kane Chronicles came out in its full version. If you guys are unfamiliar with how we do things on the two channels, on this channel, that is Echo Worm Audiobooks, which is where this live stream is taking place, this is our daily upload channel. So every single day at about 10 o'clock, and usually, 11 o'clock Eastern in the morning, and then 1 o'clock Eastern at night, typically, there's a caveat to that, but you will see daily uploads of every book that we're doing. So we've been doing the Kane Chronicles. We, of course, have already done the Percy Jackson series and the Heroes of Olympus. Then we did Kane Chronicles, and now we are going to start tomorrow on this channel the first chapter of Trials of Apollo. So the first chapter of the first book, which is titled The Hidden Oracle, will be up tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock Eastern Time. We will put it out as just kind of like a premiere. And of course, we'll go chapter by chapter every day until we're done with the book. I believe it's the end of January that the full book will be done. If you want it in advance, it's already available over on Patreon. That is patreon.com/EchoWorm. But yes, Trials of Apollo will start, in fact, tomorrow. So be prepared for that. Like I said, you can get almost the entirety of the first two books up over on Patreon. We're almost done with the second book over there. Then, of course, we'll jump straight into the third one. I mentioned the thing about typically we also have a chapter coming out at 1 o'clock Eastern Time in the morning. Right now, because of copyright purposes, there are certain books that we can't have here on YouTube. So Harry Potter is one of them. We've already done the entire Harry Potter series. You can find that over on our Patreon and Vimeo accounts for free. You don't have to pay anything extra for that. We just can't have them on YouTube. As well as things like the Spiderwick Chronicles, the Hunger Games. Right now we are almost done with Catching Fire, which is our midnight 1 o'clock Eastern Time upload. After that, we'll do Fablehaven, which we also cannot have on YouTube, which is very disappointing. And then we'll finish the Hunger Games by doing Mockingjay. Same thing will happen when the new Hunger Games book comes out. I believe it's in March that is scheduled. Flick Street Production says, I now have my own signature drink, Citrus Punch from Panera Bread. It's become to me what your Starbucks drink is for you. Well, I'm very glad that you have your own little slice of joy in life. This is my little happy drink. So yes, the TLDR of what I just explained is Trials of Apollo will start tomorrow on our daily upload channel. So look for that here. Joseph Morrill says, I can't wait until that thing happens in Trials of Apollo. And then we can all talk about that crazy thing that happens. Yeah, please no spoilers. I'll probably meet you guys in the chat if you reveal too much. I will say this, though. I have already recorded that. I decided a few weeks ago that I was going to jump ahead and record that just in advance, just to get it out of the way. So I think that should be coming on the main channel in March and should be up on Patreon. Happens chapter 20-ish, maybe 30. So 30 days from today. So middle of January, it'll come up on Patreon. Let's go to a question from Atraquinine, who says, do you have any advice for people who may want to make their own audiobooks? My advice, in terms of audiobooks, nothing specifically. Get yourself some good equipment. You guys could probably tell I have changed my equipment significantly since I started this channel. I've been doing this for about 2 years now. When I started, I was using a professional studio, like, recording microphone. I'm a professional musician, so I have just kind of a studio set up in my basement. But the way that it was working with OBS, which is the system that I use to record everything, it was very fuzzy. And you guys can tell that in some of my older recordings. And so I changed to a significantly cheaper microphone, but still a fairly good quality microphone. So I would say make sure you have just the technology. If you're going for it, just go all in right at the start if you have the ability to do so. And then just like anything, keep practicing. I've been doing this for 2 years now. Obviously, I talk a lot faster than some people would prefer. That is my most common critique of my work is I just talk too fast. And the big thing with that I'd say, and this goes for any type of YouTube channel or any type of art, is take criticism until you're satisfied with the way it is, if that makes any sense. Like, I am satisfied with my own work to the point where if someone tells me to slow down, I'm not going to listen to them, because I like doing things the way that I like doing things. So as much criticism as you might get for some things, or as much praise as you get for other things, just do what you want to do. People can request Trials of Apollo all they want, but if they're not paying for Patreon in it, no, I'm joking. But it's the same thing. People will request all these sorts of things, and you do what you want to do. You cultivate your channel, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's yours. It's nobody else's. So those are the things that I would say. If you're starting audiobooks, just keep practicing. Today I started recording something very special to me. I am doing the Christmas story from Luke chapter 2 in Norwegian. That should hopefully come out around Christmas time. I am not a native Norwegian speaker. It's my family language. I don't typically speak it at home, and my accent is significantly different than most people in Norway. But it's one of those things that I've been doing audiobooks so long that it felt like I was doing something new for a change. And so with that, same thing. You practice, you get through it, you work on your craft, and eventually you'll get to a point that you're satisfied with. Let's go to a question from Joseph Morrill. Just says, once that's out via the main channel, I can finally rant to the others about said crazy thing. Sarah W. says, what's the book schedule look like for the rest of December and January and so on? So tomorrow, like I mentioned, we will start Trials of Apollo. That should take us into January. And then on our midnight slot, we're closing up on Catching Fire, and then Fablehaven should take us then into January, excuse me. In terms of Patreon, jump ahead then. So we are already on book 2 of Trials of Apollo. We'll start book 3 in a week, I think, if I'm getting my dates correct. And then after we're done with Mockingjay, then we will move on to Dune Messiah, which is the second book in the Dune series. So that is the order of things. Rick Riordan will just continue to get through all of Trials of Apollo, and then we will get through the Magnus Chase series. We will be doing the Magnus Chase series immediately after Trials of Apollo. Somewhere in there, The Sun and the Star will come out as well, and that should take us to the end of the summer next year. In terms of the non-Rick Riordan stuff that comes out at the midnight slot, Hunger Games Catching Fire, followed by Fablehaven, followed by Hunger Games Mockingjay, followed by, like I said, Dune Messiah. After that, then it'll be Aragon and Divergent, and then we're going to go back and forth between the Inheritance Cycle and Divergent series until we're done with those. From there, then we'll make a decision that probably puts us to the end of summer, and so there's a ways to go to make that decision. So that's just kind of the immediate schedule. In terms of other books that I'm hoping to have out to you soon, City of Ember is a book that I've been working on for a little over a year now. And I'm closing up that soon. Hopefully I'll have it out to Patreon next week, and then in a week or two, then have it out on the channel as well. So that's kind of the immediate future. Continue working on the Shadow Children series, continue working on Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and then just, trudging along doing all our other stuff. Flick Street Productions says, Fablehaven is being adapted into a 5-film series by Angel Studios. All 5 books are being adapted faithfully. Thought on that? I'd like to, it'd be cool to see it. It'd be interesting to see the age differences in something like we'll talk a little bit about age progression with actors going forward, because there were some questions about it in terms of the TV series, the Percy Jackson TV series. So if they can continue to make Fablehaven believable from an age perspective, I think that'd be great. I really enjoyed the first book. I've never read past the first book, so I'm curious to do so on the channel going forward. Mirage GSM says, are you going to do Son of Sobek / Staff of Serapis / Crown of Ptolemy? Yes, keep an eye open for tomorrow. That should drop on the other channel, Echo Wirm, tomorrow morning. Those are combined into a book called Demigods and Magicians. It's a crossover between Percy Jackson and the Kane Chronicles. Should be up tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock Eastern. So look for that. Feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. I'm going to go to a pre-prepared question from Mrs. Samuel L. Jackson, who says, could you do the Chronicles of Weatherwhy next? The answer to the next question is no. My list is pretty significant, and if I were to read every single book that is on my list back to back, the way that we're doing things right now, it would take us about 7 to 8 years to finish. And so I'm not going to jump that ahead of other stuff that we've been working on for a while. But I will add it to the list. I think that's the first time it's been requested, so I'll put it on my list. But Sarah asked the question about what's coming forward. Those are what's coming forward immediately, because those are what are more commonly requested. Sarah W. says, would you ever read the Inheritance Games series by Jennifer Lynn Barnes and also the Weston Game book? Yes, those are both on my to-do list. I don't know when I'll get to them, but they are, in fact, on my list. And one of them is actually, I think, on my shelf. Just needs to be moved to my to-be-read pile. Excuse me. Let's go to a question from Sarcastic King Dude, who says, I know you have a lot on your plate, but can you please read Wings of Fire? Yes. Over in my to-do list is the first of the Wings of Fire book. So yes, that is coming up. The way I do things, right, is I always plan ahead as if we're doing them as daily chapter books. And so those are all, I don't know how to explain it without showing you a spreadsheet of it. But the 1 o'clock Eastern slot has a whole list of books back to back to back to back to back, going chapter by chapter, day by day, and then same thing for the 11 o'clock slot. So right now, Wings of Fire, if I don't get to it before it becomes a daily chapter book, which it absolutely will, right now it's projected to come onto the channel in 2027. My guess is I'll probably have the first one done by next Christmas. So feel free to look for it then. That's probably the earliest it'll arrive on the channel, but it is like within the top 5 next books on the channel. AJ Girl says, hi, nice to see you, AJ Girl. Astronomist says, back-to-back questions. Astronomist says, where can I find the Harry Potter audiobooks? Oleg says, can you make a Harry Potter audiobook, please? Tim Rollins says, you have the best audiobooks. Can you please do Harry Potter? The answer is yes. I have already done the entire Harry Potter series. The only Harry Potter related book that I haven't finished yet is Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. I'm currently working on that, but I do have all 7 Harry Potter books done. I have Harry Potter and the Cursed Child done. I have a re-record of the first book as the British version. And then I also have Tales of Beetle the Bard and Quidditch Through the Ages done over on Vimeo and Patreon. That is for free. So if you go in the links below, you should find a link to our Patreon page. You should also find a link to our Vimeo page. For free, you can find those. Like I said, it's a copyright issue. We can't have them over here on YouTube, but I have already finished all of those. Flick Street Productions says, I feel bad that Owen Colfer's standalone novels and his Warp trilogy are now under the radar. It feels like he's only loved for Artemis Fowl and nothing else. I plan to cover them. Well, I'm very excited to see what you come up with over on your channel. I am currently working my way through the second of the Artemis Fowl books. I don't know when I'd be able to get to any of Owen Colfer's other stuff, but if you're covering them, I'd love to just be able to send that over to you. AJ Girl says, can you please think about doing the Divergent series? Yeah, you must have literally just come into the chat after I finished saying that. Yes, it is coming on the channel in March. So it is very, very soon. It will probably be up on Patreon at the end of January. We'll probably start with that one. But yes, it is coming. Mirage GSM says, I just noticed that on the other channel you also have Chalice of the Gods and Wrath of the Triple Goddess. Any reason this is not on the main channel? I don't know what you mean by that. Clarify your question if you don't mind, because it should be available if you look in the folder. Everything on that channel should also be available here if you look in the folders. Let's go to a question from Kale, who says, have you ever considered doing a reading of Wicked? Yes, actually, especially after this week. I went and finally saw Wicked in theaters on Monday with my wife. It's fantastic. I've seen it on Broadway. And I was very impressed with the film adaptation. Obviously a little bummed that it's just the first act, but it makes sense story-wise. They got to flesh out the story a little more as a film version. But yes, I have thought about doing it. Obviously it's different than the musical, but the story is similar, if not the same. And I will probably try to have it done, if I can get to it, by the time the next film comes out. I think the next film is slated to come out next Christmas. So if I can have it out by next Christmas, that'd be great. Mirage GSM says, I usually follow the daily updates and did not notice it. Yeah, oh, that's why. I didn't do them as daily uploads. I dropped them as soon as they came out. So, or specifically Wrath of the Triple Goddess. I recorded them the day they came out and uploaded them the next day. Flick Street Productions says, I can't wait to see you cover the Arctic incident. It's my favorite Artemis Fowl novel, and I can't wait to see you handle it. I'm confident you'll do great. Well, thank you very much. I tell you what, Artemis Fowl is the only book that I have read and recorded in an Irish accent, and it's one of my favorite ones to do. So I do a lot of books in British accents, but Artemis Fowl was the first one where I tried my hand at just kind of a standard Dublin Irish accent, and I thought it went pretty well, and so I'm happy to be back in the saddle, for lack of a better word. Let's see here. Sarah W. says, yes, love Wicked and my girl Ari, holding space for all the books. Well, here's me holding space for you as well. Yeah, I was very impressed, like genuinely very impressed. I thought, there are very few things they could have done better to adapt the musical to a film. It was very, very well done. So, if you haven't seen Wicked yet, obviously you're probably seeing content everywhere on your feeds, but yeah, the film is very, very good. If you're a fan of Wicked the musical, which my wife and I very much are. Mirage GSM says, your Sadie Kane accent was very good. Thank you very much. I have had a lot of practice with my British. Not so much my Irish, but yeah, I did the entire Harry Potter series in the British accent. You can obviously tell that it improved from the time I started to the time I finished it. Trying to think other books that I've recorded in British accents. Skellig, I did in a British accent. The Game of Thrones series I'm doing in a British accent. Aragon and the Inheritance Cycle I will do in a British accent. And then also like Lord of the Rings, that sort of thing. Typically, if the author is British and it takes place in a fantasy or just a British-based world, then I'll typically flip the accent. That's why I decided to do Irish for Artemis Fowl, because A, he's Irish, B, the author's Irish. It made sense to me. Let's go to a question from Douglas Marshall, who says, you should do the Underland series. You're not the first person to request that. It is definitely on my list. I'm not entirely sure how far down, but Underland has definitely been requested before, and I will hopefully get to it eventually. Flick Street Productions says, I love Wicked as well. Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo were magical, and I adored the film rendition of Defying Gravity. Did you love the film rendition of Defying Gravity? I did. I thought the cinematography and the blocking of it were perfect. I don't know how better to describe it. So if you've never seen Wicked on stage, the end of the first act, right, is Defying Gravity. And what they do on stage is they basically have a machine. It's like a claw machine that when she's singing, halfway through the song, right when she gets to kind of the big climax, the claw machine like sneaks up behind her and grabs her, and you don't see it. And so all of the sudden, the actress who plays Alphaba is lifted into the air while she's singing, and you don't see it coming. And so what happens in the film version, this really isn't a spoiler, it's just kind of like blocking. But the choreography for Defying Gravity in the film that is when she is finally able to fly. And as far as I'm aware, as far as I've been told, they filmed it. It almost looks like CGI, but they filmed it practically. And so when she is flying on the broomstick, she is singing it live in the studio, as most musical films are, and she is being spun upside down on a contraption that you can't see in the film because they edited it out. And Cynthia is literally singing the climax to the song upside down, and it's very cool because it's literally what you would expect the film version of the musical to look like. So I thought it was fantastic. I thought just in general, everything they did was really, really well done. I was fearful that Ariana Grande was going to be a little too Cat Valentine, if that makes any sense. From Victorious and Sam and Cat, that was her character there. But no, she played the character perfectly. It very, very well done with the casting. So very good. Mirage GSM says, looking forward to that. I have read probably volume 1 of Artemis Fowl, probably 30 years or so ago. I'm trying to think. I think it came out in 2001, maybe? So 25 years ago, maybe? AJ Girl says, you were amazing at accents. I'd only listened to the PJO series until recently. I listened to I forgot I did Chronicles of Narnia with an accent, too. My accents were amazing. Thank you very much. Mirage GSM says, your accents are so good that when you read Bess, I always picture a satyr with a baseball bat. Interesting. Bess as in like... Because Bess is just a dwarf, right? Are we on the same... I can't remember. If you're talking Kane Chronicles, yeah, they're different characters, but I totally understand where you're coming from. Sarah W. says, would you ever try doing acting or voice acting? I think you're the only channel I actually enjoy listening. Well, thank you very much, first and foremost. Yeah, I've said this before. People have asked me that same question. I would love to. Issue is, I am very, very happy with the job that I have now. And my family and I are very well established where we are. And so if I were to do voice acting, I would prefer to do self-recordings, if that makes any sense. I wouldn't up... If I got the opportunity to be a voice actor, I wouldn't up and move my family to Los Angeles just for that opportunity, unless there was, this sounds bad, but unless there was a lot of money in it, because my family, we enjoy where we live, we enjoy what we do, and I don't want to uproot that too much. I do enjoy doing the voice acting on the channel. I think that, to toot my own horn, that's what sets me apart from other audiobook readers, is it's less of just a straight reading and more of a performance, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I very much enjoy it, and I do enjoy acting. I wish I had more opportunities. I just don't really even have time for local theater. So, let's see here. Mirage GSM says, maybe not quite as long ago then. Your best sounds similar to... Yes, I totally agree with you. I do recycle voices in different series. Let's see here. AJ Girl says, were you in a theater class when you were a kid? Yes. I'm trying to remember... I had a few leads in musicals, but I was a theater kid, but I wasn't a theater... I don't know how to describe it better than that. I was more so a band kid than I was part of the theater crew, but I did participate in my school musicals and productions and stuff like that. So that's where all this comes from. Flickstreet Productions says, one thing you may not know about the Artemis Fowl series is that the third book has more of a Tom Clancy spy feel to it. The fifth book has gotten a few positive comparisons to the Da Vinci Code. Interesting. I've always kind of got a spy feel from the Artemis Fowl series. Like I said, I've never read past the first book, so I'm curious to see your take on the third book and if I feel the same way when I get there. Sarah W. says, also, would you ever read the Mortal Instruments series? Yeah, Mortal Instruments. I'm trying to remember who's the author of that. Because I think the answer is yes. I think it's pretty high on my list, too, if I remember correctly. I've never read it, but it's been requested several times. So I believe that, yes, it's pretty high on my list at the moment. Let's go to a question from Dino King, who says, how are there no ads on your audiobooks? Well, good question. My channel's not monetized is the easy answer. And so I don't have the capability to put ads in my audiobooks. I don't make any money from YouTube. This isn't a job for me. This is a hobby. I make money over on Patreon. I'll plug the Patreon in a little bit here. But I don't make any money on YouTube. So as many subscribers as I have, I think we're close to like 17,000 between the two channels. Neither of them are monetized. So yeah, that's why there's no ads. Let's see here. Sarah W says, I love the Mortal Instruments movie with Jamie Campbell Bower. Those actors played the characters better than the TV show. Well, first and foremost, Jamie Campbell Bower is one of my favorite actors of all time. If you guys are unfamiliar, his early stuff, he was Gellert Grindelwald in Harry Potter, like the Deathly Hallows, the flashback versions is kind of where I know him from originally. But then you guys probably know him best as Vecna from Stranger Things. But he's a phenomenal actor, very, very talented guy. So I'll have to check that out. I've never seen it. AJ Girl says, what did you play in band? You look like a trumpet guy. I was a percussionist. So I'm a jazz trained bass player is where my claim to fame comes from. And so most of my musical career has stemmed from playing bass. But if you're talking like concert band, I was typically a concert percussionist. Flick Street Productions says, I was a theater kid as well in my teen years. I did mainly period pieces like A Tale of Two Cities, and the Mortal Instruments author is Cassandra Clare. Well, thank you for letting me know that. Sarah W says the same thing. Yes, it is on my list, I promise. Let's go to a question from Amanda Hoyle, who says, what book does Will show up in? So Will Solis, or Will Solis, depending on how you want to pronounce the last name, is a character in the Percy Jackson series who gets significantly more significant as the series goes on, especially in Trials of Apollo. I believe Will first appears in The Last Olympian, which is the fifth book of the Percy Jackson series. I want to say he makes a cameo just briefly. I don't know that he has any lines in that book. He really starts to come into his own. I think he makes major appearances at the end of the Heroes of Olympus series. And then, of course, he is the son of Apollo. So when Apollo shows up in Trials of Apollo, then we get Will and learn more about his story and his background. So first appearance is the last of the original 5 Percy Jackson books. His first regular appearance is book 5 of Heroes of Olympus. Sarah W says, and Jamie also played one of the vampires in Twilight. I forgot about that one. That would have been really early on in his career as well. I totally forgot he was in Twilight. Don't worry, everybody. Twilight is coming. I'm not going to tell you when, but it's on my list. My wife makes me promise that it's going to come on the channel eventually. Let's go to a question from, excuse me, Sarcastic King Dude asks, which channel is yours, Echo Wirm or Echo Wirm Audiobooks? Both. The one that this is airing on is Echo Wirm Audiobooks. Like I mentioned earlier, this is our live upload channel. So every day you'll get an upload of the chapter books that we're covering. Once we're done with all of the chapters in a book, I compile those into one single video, and then I post it to the other channel. You can still find that video on this channel. If you look in the playlists, everything that is over there should be over here if you look in the playlists. But it just helps protect against copyright and stolen content and that sort of thing. So. Viraj Badoni says, your narrations are absolutely amazing. I'm currently listening to The Lost Hero, and your voice and accents are very distinguishable. It's 3 a.m. now, and I'm going to sleep while listening to that book. Well, thank you very much for being here at 3 a.m. I very much appreciate it, Viraj. Thank you very much. AJ Girl says, so I know how you pronounce it in the books, but how do you believe Talia should be pronounced? I explained this in the comments one time. It's tricky. So if you're going by the modern Greek pronunciation, it should be Thalia, which is exactly how they do it in the TV show. So the backstory to the different pronunciations of the name, right? In the film version, which came out in 2013, the Sea of Monsters film version, they pronounce it Talia with a T. I grew up with the films. I never read the original audiobook or listened to the original audiobooks. And so for me, it's always been Talia. And so that's how I pronounce it. Which, if you go back to ancient Greek, I talked about modern Greek, it would be Thalia. In ancient Greek, it's a little trickier because TH wasn't always consistent. And we actually don't really know how they would pronounce it. Most of what we know about ancient Greek is based on our understanding of ancient Latin. And in ancient Latin, it would also be Thalia, with a a th but a hard th, and so it's I don't know how better to pronounce it than Talia. And so that's where those pronunciations come from. The original audiobooks that came out with the Percy Jackson series say Thalia, which could also potentially be right in ancient Greek, but it's very unlikely. So the correct modern pronunciation of it is Thalia, which is what they use for the TV show now. But for me, it's always been Talia, and so I stick to Talia because that's my understanding of it based on the films which I grew up with. Let's see here. Fleet Street Productions says, I was surprised by Menshikov's character depth and motivation in The Throne of Fire. It saved him from being one note and power hungry. Yeah, it's, Menshikov is one of those, and you see it especially nowadays. So 10 years ago, there was still, so we're talking about tropes, right? So character archetypes. Since the 1940s, it has been kind of the stereotype to make all villains German, right? Or make all Germans villains, for obvious reasons. Since the 1950s and 60s, the same trope has been true for Russian characters because of the United States attitudes toward the Soviet Union, toward Russia. After the fall of the Soviet Union, that started to disappear a bit. And so we got a lot of media which would play on Russian tropes where you expect them to be evil, but they're not always evil. Because as Russia fell out from the Soviet Union, Western audiences were kind of opening up to the idea that okay, well, we grew up with the Soviet Union being a terrible place and a bad place, but the Russian people are completely separate from their governments. And it's interesting to me that these books were written, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, because nowadays, with the political situation in Russia, and specifically between Western Europe and the United States and Russia, there has kind of been a reversion of that, where, at least where I live, I don't know if it's similar to where you guys live, but there is significant sympathy between the people in my town and Ukrainians, but we vilify Russians again because of the war between Russia and Ukraine. And so it's interesting that we're reading this on the channel, having this trope of the evil Russian is not necessarily just a one-note character, when this was written before the fact that nowadays we're having, like I said, that reversion to all Russians are evil sort of thing. And so it's very interesting that you're asking about that and we're discussing it, because I think you are seeing that a lot. We're seeing a return to the trope that Russians are evil. And so it's interesting that Rick would have written something similar to that. Mirage GSM says Latin didn't have an English TH sound, so it would have been a hard sound. Yeah, so that's what I was kind of explaining. So I don't know how better to so Latin, yes. Yes and no, right? They don't have a th sound, but they do have a d sound, especially in Rome. It less so around Latin, like classical Latin, you would never use a th sound, but in Italy and in later Roman, or in later Latin, as the accent developed and as it got more influenced from Greek, there was a th appeared. I don't really know how to explain it very well, but yeah, it's not a th sound, but it's a soft t. There's a difference between a hard T and a soft T, and that's the difference in Latin, at least. Let's see here. Mirage GSM. It's also how I would say it as a German. I've never heard the English TH sound in any language but English. Didn't know it existed in modern Greek. Yeah, the letter theta is the Greek. So that's where most people understand that it would be a soft TH, because in modern Greek, the letter theta is pronounced th instead of th. But in ancient Greek, it's a little trickier. So we're going down a rabbit hole of language, but yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from that. AJ Girl says, how do you feel about the Percy Jackson TV series? I had a question. I want to wrap the two together. Let me see if I can find it here. Let me see. It was Colin asks, what are your thoughts on combining the second and third books into one season of the Percy Jackson TV show, both because the second book is so short and mediocre, and also to help catch up the biological age of the actors with the multi-year season gap? Yeah, so first half of the question, I'll go with AJ Girl, who says, how do you feel about the Percy Jackson TV series? I enjoyed it for what it was. I have a lot of problems with it as a fan of the books. I'm not excited for the future of the show for a variety of reasons. One of them being they changed the ending significantly in the first book to the first season. Annabeth is a very, very different character. I'm not talking casting by any means. I'm talking how she's written. Annabeth's motivations are significantly different in the TV show than they are in the books. In the books, she is very, very much motivated by wanting to prove herself, and specifically prove herself to someone that cares about her, with someone like Luke. And so at the end of the book, Luke betrays her, but she doesn't see it. And so for the rest of the series, she doesn't believe it and has to come to terms with wanting to prove herself to Luke, but not really understanding that he's a villain now. Like needing proof that he's a villain now. And they took that away in the TV show because she is witness to that betrayal. That is not something that happens in the books. And then you have this kind of subplot of a war between Zeus and Poseidon. It's very different. It's very interesting. And so we'll see where that goes going forward. Yeah, I enjoyed seeing it on screen as a better adaptation of the book series, but when compared to the films, but I'm not looking forward to the future of the show for the reason, to follow up on Colin's question, I am worried about how slowly they're making this TV show. If they want to do 5 seasons, or even go further and move it into the Heroes of Olympus series, you cannot have year-and-a-half gaps. Because these books take place year after year after half year after half year after year. And so if we get to season 5 and all of our actors are, let's say, 22, 23 years old playing 16-year-olds, that is a problem. Now, to answer Colin's question about would I rather have them fix that by combining the 2 stories, no, for the sake of pacing. It ruins the stories that they're trying to tell. And the pacing from season 1 was already all over the place. And so, no, I don't want them to separate the seasons. I just want them to make them faster. I don't think fixing it by combining them is the right solution, if that makes any sense. Flick Street Productions says, I consider Menshikov to be a tragic villain. He got too ambitious and proud in his work to summon Ra, and how Apophis gets to him. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's what Rick was going for, especially, like I said, tying in the Russian trope with it. Genevieve Hummer says, would you ever consider doing historical fiction besides mythology? Yes, I would. There are a number of series that I'm interested in reading, or some that I have started. One of them being the House of Cards series. I'm hoping to have out sometime next summer, the first book at least. There's a variety of historical fiction that I would also love to read. Excuse me. That I just haven't gotten around to reading yet. But yes, I'm just trying to get through all of the books that have been requested so far. So if you have something, I would love to hear it. Mirage GSM says, we have several loanwords from Greek in German that are written with a TH, but they are still pronounced as T. And yes, that is true in German. That is not true with Greek. So that is typically just the German pronunciation of things. But like you said, closing the rabbit hole now. Yeah. It's interesting. Before we part, I just want to say it's interesting because what we're talking about is a translation of the Greek language into German for you, and then into English, which is very, very interesting. Because it's interesting to see a language dissected in 3 different departments. I love language. I mentioned it earlier. We'll talk a little bit about language later on in this live stream, but happy to have that conversation. It's very, very interesting. Genevieve Hummer says, one thing that people sometimes fail to understand is that Annabeth is 12, and a 12-year-old might not be able to process the betrayal of someone older who she looked up to for so many years. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why I think changing that for the TV show is A, drastic, but B, detrimental to her character development in the series, because it ruins a part of her arc that was very, very interesting to see happen on the page, if that makes any sense. Let's do. Diz says the big way Disney needs to go about doing this, assuming season 2 has good ratings, is a multi-season renewal, allowing them to shoot the last 3 seasons back to back. That's the problem right now with modern television. Is they're so hesitant to pull the trigger on long-term arcs that everything is season by season. And if it doesn't make the money that they want to, and to be honest, ratings, Disney Plus doesn't publish their ratings. So we have no idea how the ratings were. We assume they were good because the publicity was very good. But Disney Plus doesn't publish its ratings the way Netflix does. So we have no concept of how well this TV show is doing. Mirage GSM says, probably a bit of a hot take, but I would have made the characters a bit older. For one thing, it would make the casting production easier. For another, it always felt wrong to me. You're more than welcome to have that opinion. I disagree, personally. I thought that was part of what made the films feel so poorly executed, because I was no longer watching 12-year-old Percy Jackson. I was watching 16-year-old Percy Jackson, played by an 18-year-old. And the motivations of the characters change significantly, even in that 4 years, especially in your teenage years, because your outlook on the world is so different. Your worldview is so different. Your maturity level is so different. And so for me, I would rather have them be accurate, if that makes any sense, and believable in that sense. So those are my opinions, but I'm not saying yours are incorrect by any means. Let's see here. Mirage ESM says, how young the characters are in the books. Percy is fighting the Minotaur when he's what, 13? Yeah, 12. So, yeah, I understand your I don't know how to word it. Like the suspension of disbelief is difficult for you, and that's totally understandable. I'm going through the same thing in my book. My characters are 14 years old, and they're dealing with some pretty significant stuff, and trying to balance that with how they would relate to 14-year-olds is kind of it's interesting. But Flix3 Productions says, by the way, I'm caught up on the radiation effect. I love it so far, and I can't wait for the rest of the chapters. Great work so far. Well, thank you very much. I would love to talk questions about radiation effect if you guys have any. That is my own personal book that I've been writing. What I do is I write a chapter, and then I will upload it to the channel as an audiobook. The first 21 chapters are now available on the channel. The 22nd is available over on Patreon. So if you guys want to check it out, it's in the playlist titled The Radiation Effect. And I'm always happy to answer questions about it. And let me show you this here. If I go here and if I go here, this is the radiation effect Wikipedia page. So me and a couple of other people have started a wiki for the radiation effect. If you're reading through it and you have some questions that you maybe want answered, we are slowly working our way through this thing. So if you go, there should be a link in the description below on this live stream. Otherwise, you can just go to irea.fandom.com and you can check out all sorts of different pages. You can go to the All Pages tab and you can read about different chapters, different locations, different elements of the story, different characters, that sort of thing. All of that is available over on the wiki page. So if that's something that interests you, you are more than welcome to check that out, and I would love to talk about it with you guys. Genevieve Hummer says, Melanie Dickerson is an amazing historical fiction author who mainly writes about medieval times. Another one is Jenny L. Coates. She tells history according to the Bible, and it's really good. Melanie Dickerson is one that I have on my list to read. I can't remember what specifically the series is called that I was thinking of, but she was one of the authors that when you asked the first question, I would absolutely be interested in reading those eventually. Mirage GSM says, yes, the characters always felt way more mature in the books than would be expected from their supposed age. I think that's done on purpose. We can absolutely agree to disagree, but I read them as 12-year-olds. Like, I read the books when I was 12, and I didn't... It's one of those, like, in reality, obviously, like, this is something that is so above and beyond anything a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old would ever experience, right? Obviously. But keep in mind, these books are written for an audience of 12-year-olds. And so as a 12-year-old reading it, it's like, this would be the coolest thing ever for me. Like, obviously, it would be a lot of pressure and a lot of fun, but like, this is reading something that makes me feel like I want to live in this world, if that makes any sense. And so I think it's more so the audience take than anything. It's another one of those things. You look at something like Game of Thrones. Like, Game of Thrones, several of the main characters are under 12 years old and dealing with very, very significant things. Hunger Games, she's leading a revolution. She's 16 years old, that sort of thing. So it's, yeah, suspension of disbelief, whether you like it or not. Flick Street Productions says, when should we expect the rest of the chapters for the Radiation Effect? Not impatient or anything, but I just love it so far. No pressure. Typically, I try to have a new chapter out every 2 weeks or so. Every once in a while, I'll get stuck on one that maybe takes me 4 weeks, but anywhere between 1.5 to 4 weeks is the progression that we're going. So right now, I'm currently working on chapter 23. I'm hoping to have it out on Patreon sometime next week or the week after, and then typically about a week after that, it'll be up over on the channel. So let's go to a question from... I skipped over a bunch, and I gotta backtrack here. Let's find... Freddie Colton, who says, why the Hecate do you pronounce it that way? That is actually how you pronounce the name Hecate. I know in the first couple books that I read through, I think I pronounced it Hecate, which is how it looks. But in Greek, when a word ends in E, you typically pronounce the E heavily. So, for example, Hecate becomes Hecate. Persephone becomes Persephone. I'm trying to think of other ones. Yeah, those are anytime something ends with an E in Greek, you typically pronounce the E. So, Hecate. Question from Moa, who says, can you please do more of the Dune series? Yeah, I am currently working on Dune Messiah. It should be up on Patreon starting in about a week or two. As soon as we're done with Mockingjay, then we'll move on to Dune Messiah. So beyond Dune Messiah, I don't know if I will do the rest of the series. There are 6 main books and then like 15 billion non-main books. And so I am curious to see whether or not I want to go further. It's a very hard book to narrate. I enjoy reading it, but as a narrator, it's very difficult to read. I've mentioned before because of the fact that it jumps around different perspectives so fast. But I will do Dune Messiah because I know they're coming out with a film in 2026. But beyond that, I'm not sure if I'll go forward and do more of the Dune series. It gets a little, not just mature, but very weird and uncomfortable. And I've mentioned before with Stephen King stuff, there's some stuff in the Dune series as well that I'm not necessarily sure I want to give my voice to on the channel, if that makes any sense. A couple of related questions here. On the Almond Tree says, House of Hades was released in 2013. The first NXT takeover was in 2014. Did you insert this line in the audiobook for fun? William McCarthy says, how much of the funny one-liners and input is actually in the books, and how much do you add yourself? To answer William's question, it's about 80-20. Rick Riordan has a lot of like one-liners in there. He does a lot of modern humor. Like, people always ask why I inserted the line about the COVID mask in, I don't know if it was Chalice of the Gods or Wrath of the Triple Goddess. I didn't insert that. That is in the book. There's a character that wears a COVID mask. So he makes references to that. He always makes references to modern things. I do occasionally add stuff, but it's more so... A, for my own enjoyment, but B, it helps protect against people stealing my content. It's easier to find what is mine. If someone takes my recording, puts it through a filter that makes it sound like Logan Lerman or Walter Scobell, it's easier to track down my stuff and prove that it's mine, because that has happened before, especially with my Harry Potter recordings. And so it's kind of a safeguard against that. That's same logic as to why we have the 2 different channels. But yeah, it's about 80-20 Rick. In terms of the NXT line, I'm actually shocked someone caught that. And not just caught it, but thought about the timeline. So props to On the Almond Tree. I didn't think anyone would notice that or even put together that those two are 2 separate things. So props to you. Genevieve Hummer says, I adore the one-liners in the book. I like it when you say subscribe to Echo Worm when a random character says it. I try to do it just once. I know it can get distracting if I do it too often, so I'm trying to do it just once per audiobook, just so we can have that protection. Let's see here. Mirage GSM says, again, linguistics, it would probably pronounce, but not the English way. So with the E sound in bed, for example. Hecate. Yes. Hecate. Yeah, it wouldn't be a hard E, but It's one of those. It's an English translation of Greek, if that makes any sense. It's like how English has a lot of French loanwords, right? And typically we pronounce them slightly different than the original French. Same with Latin and same with Greek. But yes, so when you're using names specifically, in English you would pronounce it with a hard E sound instead of saying like ekete. Because actually in Greek you wouldn't even pronounce the H. You just say ekete. In modern Greek. In ancient Greek you would pronounce the H. It's linguistics. It's a fun subject. Flick Street Productions says, did you know that Owen Colfer wrote the final book in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? It's called And Another Thing. It's a good ending, and the audio drama version is very good. I did know that. It may have been you before, but someone has mentioned that in the live stream before. I had never known that before, but I have heard that before. Let's go to a question from Christian Callie, who says, what order do I read the Percy Jackson books? So I have all of... If you think of Rick Riordan's books as he has 5 main series, right? An Egyptian one, a Norse one, and then he has 3 Greek ones, tangentially. The 3 Greek ones make up a series that is broadly called Camp Half-Blood Chronicles, is the name of the 3 series together. If you go to either channel and you look in the playlist titled Camp Half-Blood Chronicles, you should find a playlist in the order of every book that you should read them. So it's chronologically. So it has the first 5 Percy Jackson books, including the additional the Demigod files. And then you have the Heroes of Olympus series with the extra books in there. And then you have the 2 new Percy Jackson books, and then you have the 5 Trials of Apollo books. Yeah, if you look in the playlist, that should be the order that you should read them in. That is the chronological order. It makes probably the most sense to read those in that order. So like I said, it's the 5 Percy Jackson originals, and then the 5 Heroes of Olympus books, the new Percy Jackson books, and then the 5 Trials of Apollo books. Question from Meaningless Standards, who says, will you be doing demigods and magicians? Yeah, I answered that earlier. Someone else asked that in the chat. We will be doing that tomorrow. So tomorrow morning on the channel, look for it. It should be in either Kane Chronicles playlist that should air at, I think, 11 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow morning. Question from Eli, who says, can you please do a couple different questions. Eli says, can you please do Magnus Chase? Max Ruff says, are you going to read the Magnus Chase series? Yes, as soon as we are done with Trials of Apollo, then we'll move straight on to Magnus Chase. Son of the Star will be dropped in there as not a daily chapter book, but just like a full version of it. But then, yes, then we'll... lost my train of thought there for a second. Yes, Magnus Chase will come right after Trials of Apollo. Flick Street Production says, I love the insert of Ty Farnsworth trading solos with JD and Anne in The Serpent's Shadow. Nice one. Thank you very much. Anytime there's jazz involved, I try to insert myself in there. I think I did it in Trials of Apollo too, so look for that coming up ahead. But yeah, I will occasionally try to name drop either Echo Worm or myself especially when it comes to music. I do have links to my music in the description below, but that's totally if you guys want to check it out. It's not for everybody. Let's go to a question from Night Reader, who says, would you consider reading The Keeper of the Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger? I will definitely add it to the list. That's the first time I've never read it. I don't think I've ever heard of it. So I will add it to my list of things to check out. I wanted to check, feel free to keep asking questions in the live chat here. I wanted to check to see if anyone had asked anything on Discord or anything since we started the live stream. Answer is typically no. Let's see here. Question from Aishna, who says, can you please read The Serpent's Shadow? Yeah, the full version should be out now. So if you go to either channel and you look in the Kane Chronicles playlist, you should be able to find The Serpent's Shadow, aired this morning. So Sarah W. Has a question that I think was asked earlier too. Let's see here. Where was it? Eric McGovern says, how many chapters is the radiation effect going to have? At the moment, and this may change depending on how I feel the pacing is. At the moment, it's looking like 34 chapters and an epilogue, so 35 total. I have recorded through chapter 22, so we're about 2/3 of the way through the book. We just kind of have to set up the ending, and set up there's a pretty significant set of just resolving actions for various characters. Jordan has a big plot line at the end of the book. Emma and Johnny have Johnny's disappeared now, so it's a will they won't they find Johnny sort of thing as we move toward the end of the book. Something major happens in Margot and Kent's life, and we'll talk about that going forward, and just wrapping all these things and maybe introductions to characters that we've only kind of tangentially heard about at the moment. I don't want to spoil anything too much, but I have a pretty solid outline of what is going to happen in the rest of the book. But like I said, always happy to answer questions about Radiation Effect. I'm very proud of it. So, Flick Street Productions says, did you know that Greta Gerwig is adapting one of the first chronological Narnia novels, either The Silver Chair or The Magician's Nephew? Thoughts on it? Yeah, I knew they were doing the Chronicles of Narnia series with Greta Gerwig. I like Greta Gerwig as a director. My worry is there was a tweet that came out recently, and I can't remember who it was, if it was like Pop Crave or Rolling Stone or one of those. But they said Greta Gerwig's Narnia series is going to, I'm going to paraphrase this because I'm not going to get it correct, but they said something along the lines of, is going to add a rock and roll flair to the Narnia world. And I read that and I went, what? What does that mean? So I don't know. Like, I think if she directs, because Greta Gerwig did Little Women, right? So if she directs Chronicles of Narnia in a way that is similar to Little Women, I think, especially for The Magician's Nephew, because that's a very similar time period, I think that would be fantastic. Beyond that, I'm curious to see what they'll do with the order of the films. I'm curious to see if they'll go chronological or if they'll skip around like they did with the Walden Media series. Obviously, Walden Media, they were planning on doing The Silver Chair, and then they canceled it because Voyage of the Dawn Treader kind of fell apart. But, yeah. Cautiously optimistic is probably the best way I can say that. Poseidon's Cabin BFF of Percy says, when will you be reading Camp Half-Blood Confidential? Sometime in the next few months here. It is on the to-be-read pile behind me. I've already done Camp Jupiter Classified, and I've already done the tangential material for the previous series. So I'll do Camp Half-Blood Confidential, I'll do Percy Jackson's Greek Gods, Greek Heroes, that sort of thing. All of those should be up on the channel eventually. I'm hoping in the next couple months I'll have it up there. Genevieve Hummer says, how do you add rock and roll to a series that was written before rock and roll was even invented? Yeah, I don't think they meant anything to do with the style. I don't think they meant anything to do with the music. I just, it was one of those things, they said it, or they tweeted it, and I was like, what does that mean? Why? And so, yeah, anyways. Do you think they'll keep the religious themes in the Chronicles of Narnia? I hope so. The backstory of the Chronicles of Narnia, the reason that the Chronicles of Narnia were written, if you weren't aware of this, C.S. Lewis was a born-again Christian, and he wanted to create a children's series that is a fantasy retelling of the Bible. And so he basically took, 7 major stories from the Bible, give or take quite a few. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is not very much... It's a story of the resurrection, but it's not as heavy-handed as the rest of the series is. Magician's Nephew is very obviously a retelling of Genesis. I'm trying to think what else. Horse and His Boy is very obviously a retelling of Joseph from the Old Testament. And then Last Battle is obviously Revelation. That's probably the most obvious one. Silver Chair is a little less obvious. It's more so... Silver Chair is kind of an analogy for atheism, if that makes any sense. And then Voyage of the Dawn Treader is kind of a retelling of the Acts of the Apostles. So I want them to. I think one of the more surprising things to me in the Disney version, the Walden Media version, is they name dropped Jesus in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which I don't think anyone expected them to do. It's in the book. where Aslan basically says that I exist in your world, they call me Jesus. And Liam Neeson basically says the same thing in the film. And so it was very shocking to a lot of people who were fans of the Narnia series but didn't know the religious background of it when they saw that in theaters. And so to me, my expectation is that no, there will not be as many religious elements that are brought into the Greta Gerwig film, just understanding her filmography and just kind of where things are at pop culture wise, which is disappointing, both as a Christian and as someone who loves the original series. But I'm going into it, like I said, cautiously optimistic. Mirage GSM says, if they take out the religious themes from Chronicles of Narnia, there will be not much left. Yeah, I think they'll, like, the stories will still be there, and they'll have the references to, but the Chronicles of Narnia books are very obviously Christian books. Like, when you read them, it's very obvious. You're reading through The Last Battle and you go, okay, so this guy is the Antichrist, and this guy is the Beast, and this guy is this character from the Bible, and this is the angel that appeared here, and this is representative of this character, and that sort of thing. So it's, yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how much is overt analogy, the way that the books are, and how much is just kind of swept under the rug because they just want to tell the story and they don't want to get all religious with it, that sort of thing. Flickstreet Production says, what are your influences for the radiation effect? I get some feels of Divergent, the Michael Vase series, maybe some Tom Clancy and George Orwell vibes as well. I think specifically the Hunger Games. Hunger Games and Divergent had a very, very big part to play in when I started writing the radiation effect as a teenager. That was what was big. And as I reread through them, there are very, very overt references that I forgot about, that are in these books that I've taken and adapted. I would say the X-Men the X-Men series has a significant influence on just the power side of things. The political intrigue is House of Cards. It's Michael Dobbs, excuse me. So I would say in terms of the political side of things, Game of Thrones and House of Cards had a significant influence on that. But in terms of the world and the power struggle and the characters that are in the series, I would say a lot of that is based, like I said, Hunger Games, Divergent, and even Percy Jackson to some extent. I think Emma and Margot are both very, very in different sides of the same coin taken from Annabeth. Like Emma's backstory of being from Houston and being a Spanish speaker, that's taken from Leo. Trying to think what else that I kind of overtly have realized that I overtly took from other materials. I don't know if there's anything that specific, but if you go to the Wikipedia page, certain characters, I have like a trivia section at the bottom of each page, and some characters it tells you a little bit about who they're influenced by and that sort of thing. So, Genevieve Hummer says, as a Christian, I think C.S. Lewis did a great job with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because I think it makes it easier for children to learn about the stories from the Bible. I completely agree. The one thing that I enjoy about the rest of the series, as opposed to the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, this is kind of the point, right? Because that's typically, it's the second book chronologically, but it was the first book written, and it's typically the one that people know. And so that is kind of the least overtly parallel. Like I said, it's got the resurrection in it, but it's the least Bible-based of the books. It's mostly a fantasy book that has elements of Christianity in it. For me, as someone who enjoys, reading through the Bible and understanding not just the lore of it, but the world around it, it is so cool to see it adapted in all the other books. That is why I enjoy Voyage of the Dawn Treader more. That is why I enjoy Prince Caspian more. That's why I enjoy the bookends of it more, because I know the original versions of them. So Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for me doesn't hit as hard because it's not quite the retelling that I enjoy in comparison to the other ones, if that makes any sense. Sarah W. says, what stories was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Prince Caspian based on? Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is basically a retelling of the Gospels. It's preparing the way for... I don't know how to describe it best. If you're unfamiliar with the Gospels, this may not mean anything to you. But the Pevensey children in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe are probably most similar to John the Baptist, separated into 4 parts. There are elements of Genesis in there with Edmund and his storyline. There are elements of Revelation in there based on the witch and that sort of thing, but most of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is based on the crucifixion of Jesus and the resurrection and that sort of thing. But it is also mostly based on fantasy lore. So if you think of things like high fantasy, such as Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were very good friends, and he took elements of Lord of the Rings and made them retellable for children. In a way that Tolkien's weren't so. And so Prince Caspian is interesting because it's the story of... It's kind of another version of the Gospels, where instead of the resurrection, it's the... We are coming to make things new again. It doesn't require the sacrifice, but it requires the return of the Force... a return of good to a world that is broken and a world that is full of sin. And so both of the stories are kind of different versions of the gospel, but also take a lot of elements of characters like Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. And so they're less so Bible stories and more so just fantasy stories, if that makes any sense. At least from my understanding of it. Mirage GSM says, I better go to bed now. Have a nice rest of the stream. Well, thank you very much for being here, Mirage. I very much appreciate it. Flick Street Productions says, have you watched The Chosen? I have watched some episodes and I love it so far. Yes, I am very familiar with The Chosen. The Chosen, for those of you that aren't aware, is it's basically the Bible on TV. It's a retelling of Jesus' life as a TV show. So, very overtly religious. Like, Jesus is the main character. It's not like a mask of the stories, kind of like Chronicles of Narnia is. Let's go to a question from Don Ricardo, excuse me, I keep jumping ahead. Let's go to a question from Chapman Family, who says, can you do the rest of the Diary of Wimpy Kid books? Yes, I have done the first 4. My goal is to have one new one out every 2 months. That gives me a little more free time to just do all of the other books that I need to get done. So The Ugly Truth, I'm hoping will come out sometime in January. And then every 2 months we'll have a new one. So eventually I'd like to get through the whole series. We'll see if the viewership continues to be strong. It's one of my stronger series. There's typically about 1,000 views per book, which is kind of impressive. So yes, we'll keep working our way through it. Question from Josh Hill, who says, can you please do Fablehaven? Yes, it is currently available on Patreon. If you are a member of the patron community, it will be available for everybody over on Patreon and Vimeo starting in January. So feel free to look for that when it comes out. But otherwise, if you want it in advance, it is currently available in full right now over on Patreon, which is a great time to bring up Patreon. I know people are starting to leave and I wanted to maybe cover this earlier, but if you go to patreon.com/EchoWorm, we have a very cool thing going on right now called the Holiday Discount. So our Patreon is $5 a month or more. You get everything. For just $5 a month, you get every single thing that we've ever recorded available for you, and you get things in advance of the channel by about 2 months. And right now, from now to the end of December, if you use the promo code ECHO, that is ECHO, you get 50% off your first month. And so for that's basically $250 a month, at least American dollars. I don't know what it translates to for you, but you can go become a member for just $250. Renew it if you want to. Don't renew it if you don't want to, but just go use promo code ECHO, and you can join the Patreon and jump ahead of the channel by about 2 months. Let's see here. Flick Street Productions says, I just posted chapter 7 of The Supernaturalists. I hope you like my reading so far. If you guys haven't checked out Flick Street Productions, go over there and check out that channel as well. Sarah W. says, would you ever read The Dork Diaries? It's been requested before. It's on my list. I've never read them, but we will perhaps get to them in the future. Let's go to a question from, or a suggestion from Anglo, who says, I want to suggest looking into the Lorien Legacies series. I've never heard of them. I will have to check them out. I will add it to my list. Go to a question from Luke Schumacher, who says, can you do the rest of Fablehaven? Or how about Gregor the Overlander? Yeah, both are on my list. The next Fablehaven book, I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to get it out. Probably sometime next summer. And then we might do a thing where we cycle it around with a different series. At the moment, though, it might be a while till we get to the second book. But the first book, like I said, is available over on Patreon. It should be up on Patreon for free. It's not going to be up on the channel for copyright reasons, but it'll be up for free over on Patreon and Vimeo in January. Gregor the Overlander series, that is, I believe, the one by Suzanne Collins, correct? Her first big series. And yes, it is on my list. Hopefully we'll get to that eventually as well. Confused Rat says, have you ever considered doing Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit? Yes. That is another, it's another one of those series, because of the copyright restrictions by the Tolkien estate, they are pretty heavy against channels like mine. And so if we were to do that, that would be one of those where you guys would have to not be on YouTube and go over to Vimeo or Patreon. I'd probably put up for free, just like we do every other thing. But I will do The Hobbit first, just to get through. It's a lot easier to get through than Lord of the Rings. But probably eventually we will get to Lord of the Rings as well. But that's kind of my caveat to why I'm waiting to do those books, because we can't have them on YouTube. Flicker Street Productions says, have you heard of Dan Gutman's books, like the My Weird School series? I read his Genius Files series and hugely disliked it. I've never read them. I have probably experienced them on the shelves at Barnes & Noble and just kind of ignored them, but I've never read them. I've never participated in that. Let's go to a question from Jared Parnell, who says, have you thought about doing the Ranger's Apprentice series? Yes. That has been requested quite a bit, actually. For some reason, recently, like within the last week, I think there's been 3 separate people who've asked me to do the Ranger's Apprentice series. So I'll bump that up in my list, but yes, it is on my list. It's been requested a few times. Cecilia Servisky says, could you read The Count of Monte Cristo? I can add it to my list. Classical literature is something that I've been trying to get a hold of, but it's not very popular on the channel. I've done a few Sherlock Holmes readings, and they're not grasping as well as I would want them to, if that makes any sense. Maybe if we had more classic readings on the channel, they'd be more popular. But at the moment, the thing that people are requesting is a lot of recent, like, fantasy young adult literature, and so that's kind of where I'm going to stick my focus, but I will definitely add it to my list. Question from Don Ricardo, who says, what is your favorite book of all time? I say at the moment, but I've been saying at the moment for about a year. My favorite book at the moment is A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. It's the 3rd book in the Game of Thrones series, or a Song of Ice and Fire series. It's basically the one that everything happens in. So if you've ever seen Game of Thrones, the TV series, Storm of Swords basically takes up seasons 3 and 4. So everything that happened, for the most part, that happens in those 2 seasons. You think of the Red Wedding, you think of the Purple Wedding, you think of Tyrion's trial, you think of the Viper versus the Mountain. All of that happens in Storm of Swords. It's a very, very good book, as well as a very good couple of TV seasons. So, Sarah W. says, could you also read the 2 James Patterson series, Middle School and the iFunny series? They're on my list. You're not the first person to ask. I don't know when I'll get to them, but yes, they are, in fact, on my list. Let's go to a question from, let's see here, Lucas Scheid, who says, when are we going to get a Norwegian audiobook? Good question. So we were talking language earlier, and the one thing I wanted to say about language is I am currently working on reading Luke 2, which is the Christmas story, in Norwegian. Now, I mentioned earlier in this live stream, Norwegian is not my native language. It's my family language. English, very obviously, is my first language. I do speak tangential parts of other languages. My pronunciations in Norwegian, and specifically my phrasing in Norwegian, is not very good. And so I am about a fifth of the way through reading Luke 2. I'm hoping to have it out on Christmas because, like I said, that is the Christmas story. But I'm doing it in Norwegian and doing my best with just kind of a metropolitan Norwegian pronunciation, because I know my family is from a very, very specific part of Norway and pronounces things very differently to what you would in Oslo or even somewhere like Trondheim. But hopefully it is out by Christmas, and hopefully it is good by Christmas. I am hoping to have that out as my first non-English audiobook on the channel. People have asked if I would do stuff in Spanish or if I would do stuff in... someone asked if I would do something in German. My German is not very good, and I'm a little embarrassed by it. Spanish, maybe. It's another one of those things, like my phrasing is not very good. My pronunciation is probably a lot better, but yeah, German is probably not going to happen. I recorded myself reading the Regenbogenfisch, and it's not very good. So if I could work on that, Mirage GSM would probably rip me to shreds in the comments, and that's fine. I need to improve on it. But yeah, Spanish and Norwegian are probably the two languages that I would need to do in different languages. There is a bit of French in the Radiation Effect. I don't, if you guys are familiar with it. Three of the main characters are fluent in French, and two of them converse pretty regularly using it. In the audiobook, I typically don't do the French. I will flip it to English and say that they're speaking French, that sort of thing. But yeah, that is kind of my knowledge of languages beyond that. Let's see here. Flickstreet Productions says, have you ever read Les Miserables by Victor Hugo? I have. I'm vastly more familiar with the musical, but I have in fact read, and I believe I have it. I'm looking on my shelf. There it is. It's got the white Barnes & Noble like classic binding. But it's been a while since I've actually read through it and not just watched the musical. Suzanne William James, says, I would love the Maximum Ride series by James Patterson. That one is on my list as well. James Patterson has been requested quite a bit, so I will continue to bump those up the more people request them. I have a list of about 100 books right now, that the more people request them, the more priority things get. It's weighted at the moment, so... Let's go to a question. I think I only have a few more. If you guys want to keep asking questions in the chat, I am happy to stay as long as you guys want. I can probably do another half hour. My guess is we'll probably wrap things up in about 15 minutes unless you guys keep asking questions in the chat. So if you guys have questions that you want answered, you are more than welcome to do so, and I will stick around as long as you want me to. Question, from Maria Stenovich, who says, do you have any plans to read The Witcher? Yes. So one thing that is interesting to me, and has been since early on the channel, we have a significant Polish following on the channel. Poland is probably my most popular viewership country outside of the big four English-speaking countries like the United States, Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom. So we have quite a few Polish listeners, and since the beginning, people have been asking when I'm going to read The Witcher. I do promise that I will be butchering pronunciations. My Polish is not good, but it is on my list. It will soon be in the pile behind me, and eventually we will get to the first of the Witcher books, which... The Witcher is an interesting series because the first book, technically, right, is it The Last Wish? But then there's also the novella that started it, The Witcher. So I'm not entirely sure where to start with the Witcher series as an audiobook reader, but eventually we will get there. It is on my list. Flickstreet Productions says, are you a Tom Clancy fan? Yes. Yes, I am, but it's been a while since I've read Tom Clancy, so I don't know if my opinions on his writing have changed at all, but I am familiar with some of Tom Clancy's work, and I've read a few of his books before. Last of my pre-prepared questions, this one comes from Doug Davis, who says, in Chapter 19 of The Radiation Effect, What causes Bill Guerin to flip on Emma during the phone call? So it's a little bit of a spoiler, and I don't want to give too much away. So I'll give you the answer of what we know in the chapter and what maybe we can deduce from what happens. So in the chapter 19 takes place in the safe house, right? This is before the invasion. And Emma gives her father a call. And in the chapter, she's basically explaining what happened to her father, because her father is pissed about the fact that the mission failed. Like, it was a very, very choreographed mission. Someone was supposed to die, but the person who was supposed to die didn't die, and someone else that wasn't supposed to die did die. And so he's trying to figure out what went wrong. And Emma explains to him what they know, like their mission was sabotaged. And when she explains who they think sabotaged it, then all of a sudden her dad gets really, really quiet. And out of nowhere, he kind of like flips on her. And he says, like, he basically tells her, this phone call didn't happen. Like, you need to destroy your phone immediately. This, like, do not talk to me until you get back home. We'll talk about it when you see me in person. And so she freaks out. She kind of has a panic attack, that sort of thing. But the reason for him flipping, I'm not going to reveal it. But the important thing to look at is when in the conversation he does, and what specifically they're bringing up during the conversation to cause him to stop talking to her and to cause him to basically silence her. And so to look back on that, the flip basically happens when Emma reveals that they believe the mission was sabotaged by people within the company. And so the question that maybe you can think of going forward is, okay, was he freaking out about the fact that someone inside the company is working against him? Is he worried about the fact that he knew that was going to happen, but he didn't expect the others to find out about it? Is it he doesn't know who it is and he's worried about someone coming after him from the inside? Those are the kind of questions that me as the author, I'm trying to get you, the reader, to think about. And so I would say just look at where the conversation happens, and maybe you can come up with your own theories. The big thing I want with this book, and specifically where we're at now, is I want you guys to theorize about what's going on with each different character. One of the cool things that we have over on Discord, and you guys are more than welcome to join the Discord server. We have links in the description below that should be a permanent link. If it doesn't work for whatever reason, let me know, and I'll add a new one to the description. But over on Discord, we have different channels dedicated to different material. And one thing that we've been talking about on the Radiation Effect chat is, how much does Emma know? How much does she think she knows? And how much is she making up as she goes? And so Emma is very obviously shaken in this. But as we see going forward, there's something that happens in chapter 22 that you guys will see when it comes out on the channel. It's currently out over on Patreon. Is how much of the way that she orchestrates things, how much of that is planned? How much of the world is she manipulating, and how much is she just taking advantage of in order to manipulate the things that she needs to manipulate? How much of that is based around her father? How much of it is she doing it because of him? Is she doing it for herself? I want you guys to theorize about what's going on with the motivations of all of these different characters. And maybe we'll be right in the end, maybe we won't be right in the end. But the theories is really what I'm curious to see where you guys are at right now. Flick Street Productions says, I didn't know you had a lot of fans from Poland. Nice. It reminds me of how Germans are huge fans of David Hasselhoff, especially during his time on Baywatch. I wouldn't compare myself by any means to David Hasselhoff, especially not on a fame level or anything. But it's very interesting to see that we have a listenership over in Poland. I know, and at one point when we had the Harry Potter audiobooks on YouTube, there were a lot of Indian and Chinese listeners who would use them to learn English, which is interesting. And so I got a lot of listens over in India because of that as well. And I know a lot of people have moved over to Patreon because of that too. With that being said, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I just want to go talk about what is coming up on the channel. Just once again, over on Patreon, every night for free, a new chapter of Catching Fire will come out. We're almost done. I think it's done this weekend. And then we'll start on Fablehaven. And then we will start on Mockingjay. Mockingjay is currently airing for paying members on Patreon. It's about a month or two in advance of the channel, as well as Trials of Apollo, which we're done with the first book over on Patreon. It'll start tomorrow on the channel as a daily upload book over here on YouTube. And then once we're done with Trials of Apollo, eventually we'll move on to Magnus Chase. After Hunger Games, after we're done with Hunger Games, then we're going to move on to the Inheritance cycle. So we'll do Aragon, we'll do Eldest, we'll do Brysinger, we'll do all of those books, in addition to kind of jumping back and forth between the Inheritance cycle and Divergent. Once we're done with those series, then it's kind of up in the air. But things I'm working on in the meantime, continuing to work our way through the Magic Treehouse series. We're almost done, actually. We have maybe about 15 books left. Continuing to work my way through A Song of Ice and Fire and all of the tangential material with that. I'm looking at the pile in front of me. I also have City of Ember, which I'm hoping to finish up in its entirety tonight. That way I can have it out over on the channel in a couple weeks here. And then eventually we'll do the rest of those books as well. The rest of the Giver series, Tale of Despero, the rest of the Missing series, the rest of the Shadow Children series, Dune Messiah, A to Z Mysteries, The Sun and the Star is coming up sometime next spring. Diary of Wimpy Kid will keep moving on. Goosebumps will keep moving on. And hopefully that brings us pretty firmly into next year. In addition, we're also working on things like The Maze Runner, The Phantom Toll Booth I'd like to have out sometime next summer as well. And then just other material as well, like House of Cards I mentioned, Artemis Fowl, that sort of thing. So if you guys have stuff, you are always welcome to request it. The list is long, but that doesn't mean that things can't be bumped up, or that doesn't mean that things won't be read eventually. So I'm always happy to have requests. I'm always happy to engage with you guys. If you have questions that I didn't answer on today's live stream, feel free to drop them in the comments of either this video or any of the others, and we'll touch on them in 2 to 3 weeks when we do our next live stream. Next one, let's see, 2 weeks from today is going to be December 26th. I probably won't do a live stream during Christmas week, so let's do 3 weeks from today. I believe that's going to be the first Thursday in January that we'll do our next live stream. We have taken a break from our weekly podcast. Eventually, we'll probably restart that with book 2 of Harry Potter and continue going with that. You guys can find that on the channel. You can find that over on Patreon, over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify by looking for Echo Wirm, or the Echo Chamber is what it's normally called. And then just stay tuned for more material coming up on the channel. Like I said, first book in Trials of Apollo starts tomorrow. You guys can stop asking me about it. It'll be up on the channel tomorrow. Tomorrow. Check out the Patreon if you guys have the ability to do so. Right now, the discount is down to $2.50 a month. And then you guys can check out the Radiation Effect if you're interested. There's a wiki for it. I'm always interested to know what you guys are thinking. You guys can ask questions in the comments about the Radiation Effect. You guys are more than welcome to join the Discord server and talk about it and other material over there. We have chats over on Patreon. We have chats anywhere you want to go. But from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you guys. I don't usually go off on personal tangents, and I'll keep this very brief. It's been a rough couple of months for me personally. I mentioned I've been going through a few injury things, physical health things, and I've had to significantly change my diet because of certain health things, and it's kind of affected my mental health as well. And so I won't go into too many details, but I've been struggling through a pretty rough time in the last couple months, and I wanted to thank you guys for being a light in sometimes an otherwise dark world. So I appreciate the things that I do for you guys. I appreciate the way that you guys engage with the channel. Thank you guys for being a part of this. This has never been about me. It's never been about making money. It's never been about doing anything beyond just reading the books that I enjoy and getting to share them in a way that is receivable for you. You know, maybe you guys can't read, or maybe you guys don't have the time to read. That's what I'm here to do, is to share these stories with you in a way that is accessible And so I really appreciate you guys being a part of this. I appreciate the feedback that you guys give me. And thank you for being a part of this community and these live streams especially. So hope you guys have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and we will see you for one of these live streams back on the channel in 2025. See you soon.